In the meantime, Fox News now reporting via a senior U.S. defense official that those classified documents leaked and posted a telegram were actually not Israel's specific plans for an attack on Iran, but instead the documents are descriptions of satellite images showing Israeli warplanes that were preparing for a strike and practicing air refueling. Just one of many topics here that I do want to discuss with a good friend of the show, Dr. Jonathan Schanzer, the Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to be here with us.
My pleasure.
All right, so first off, I do want to ask you about the classified documents leak. Now that we have a little bit more information here on what may have happened, can you tell me, do you think it's going to impact Israel's retaliatory attack on Iran? And of course, that retaliatory attack in retaliation for 180 ballistic missiles that were fired by Iran at Israel earlier on this month.
Yeah, look, I think the leak has had a couple of immediate and then maybe one or two long-term impacts. The immediate impact was that Israel put off its strike, reportedly, what we're hearing today, that perhaps it was a couple of days delay. From what we're hearing right now out of Israel, we may be actually approaching the moment. There was, I think, some thinking that maybe they'd wait until after the elections. That doesn't seem likely right now. I get the sense that the Israelis would like to do this sooner rather than later. But I think the leak did have an immediate impact of pushing off the strike by a couple of days. I think, though, that there is a bigger problem here at play, and that is that the trust between the two countries may be eroded a bit. There's a sense within Israel that perhaps information that they've been providing or perhaps that the U.S. has been collecting is going to be used against them in some way. And this is, of course, this comes on top of a series of other incidents where, for example, the administration began withholding weapons from Israel out of fears of possible humanitarian crises in Gaza. Warnings about strikes in Lebanon, even though Israel had sustained something like 8,000 different rocket and missile attacks from Hezbollah. In other words, the Israelis feel like they're having their hands tied and their information leaked or revealed. That's not a good combination. And so I think right now all eyes are on the FBI. The FBI is looking into what happened with those leaks. They're trying to figure out who leaked it, what the motivation was. I think that's going to be important in order to reset ties with Israel. But in the meantime, again, we do get a sense that the Israelis are preparing for the inevitable. There's no way they're not following through with this strike on Iran.
And you are taking a live look here over the Israel-Lebanon border. You can see that smoke live in the distance as we see more of the operations taking place. Again, just earlier on today, Hezbollah fired those rockets, a barrage of about 50 or so at Israel, injuring 4 people. And we know, of course, that the fighting there does continue. Again, that is a view over Lebanon. Now, Yoav Gallant actually told pilots and crews at the Israeli Air Force Base that after its attack on Iran, quote, everyone will understand what you did in the preparation and training process. What do you take away from that statement?
Well, here's what I take away. I mean, I've had a number of really interesting conversations with folks in Israel over the last couple of weeks, just trying to get a sense of, the Israeli shift in the strikes in Lebanon. It's been pretty remarkable. We've gone from a tactical war in Gaza to some really remarkable decapitation strikes against Hezbollah leaders. Of course, everybody remembers those exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. It really does look like the Israelis are pulling off some really remarkable operations. My sense is that whatever is going to happen next in Iran is going to be an extension of that. In other words, the Israelis have been preparing for a war with Lebanon since 2006. They've been preparing for strikes against Iran since probably even the late 1990s. So what you're looking at is decades of preparation here for the kinds of military operations that are about to take place. So there's a lot of anticipation in Israel. They have trained a ton. Their pilots are ready for this. The crews back home, the intelligence, the refueling planes, all of these things that we're hearing about right now, this has been part of a long-term planning process. We obviously don't know all of the specifics about what's going to go into this forthcoming strike. But there's a lot of anticipation in Israel after years of prep.
We did hear from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He had that 2.5 hour meeting with Netanyahu just a couple days ago. And after he spoke to the media, he essentially hinted at the fact, indicated that the U.S. would actually withhold military aid from Israel if that humanitarian aid is not increased into the area of Gaza. There's also been talk about that general's plan that would cut off aid over to, I believe it's northern Gaza. Now, do you think that the U.S. would actually end its support there for Israel and cut off the military aid? Would that even happen? Is it a reality?
Look, here's what's going on. And I think we need to be really clear about this. We are in the throes of an election cycle here in the US, and that is having a significant impact on what the administration says about Israel, about this war. We know that within the president's party, there are those that are very unhappy about this war. I think perhaps more specifically, they're unhappy about the administration's support to Israel. There is a faction, it's vocal, it's small, and they have made sure that everybody knows exactly what they think. And this has been going on now for 13 months. This administration, I think, is looking to do some signaling to that sector of the party. And I think they really want to do this in the lead up to these elections. Is there a humanitarian crisis in Gaza? Look, it's not a pleasant place to be, but I don't think that we've seen any indications that the Israelis have deliberately forced a problem upon the people of Gaza that would prevent food from coming in, that would prevent vaccines from getting in. We know that there's been a polio vaccination campaign as well. This, I think, is some serious virtue signaling to the American electorate with a couple of weeks left before our election. Now, what does that mean? We don't know right now. I think part of it may really come down to who wins. If Kamala Harris wins and she decides that she wants to push the current White House, a lame duck president, to impose further restrictions on the Israelis, that may in fact play out. If Donald Trump wins, who knows? But I think that right now they're weighing their options. But in the meantime, I do think we have a sense anyway from this White House that they're going to be supportive of the forthcoming strikes in Iran. I think they're generally supportive of Israel's campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon because I think they know that there's really no choice for Israel after sustaining thousands and thousands of rockets. And really, the Israelis had been restrained by the administration for the vast majority of the last 13 months. The Israelis were being told not to respond. Eventually, it had to give. There was no choice in the matter for Israel as they lost 150,000 people were forced from their homes in northern Israel. It was unsustainable from the Israeli perspective. I think the real question right now is after Sinwar's death in Gaza, after Hamas is essentially declared a spent force, how much more fighting does Israel have to do in Gaza, and how much can the administration prevail upon the Israelis to simply walk away from what is now probably going to be deemed a mid or low level insurgency?
Blinken also mentioned this quote unquote new framework that he says is in place, so to speak, being discussed there for a hostage release ceasefire deal. But we've heard this a lot over the past several months. So is this likely anything new?
Well, there are a couple of different things that are in play right now, and I think we need to just, unpack each one of them. One is a broad framework that would see the release of 101 hostages in exchange for perhaps even a permanent ceasefire. I question whether that's feasible because I'm not sure that anybody actually knows where all 101 hostages are now that Sinwar is dead. He, I believe, was the one person or one of the few people that actually knew where everyone was. And so it may be complicated to get a full all-encompassing deal done that sees the release of all the hostages. There's another framework. The first framework is actually being pursued by the head of the Mossad, and I think a lot of the other kind of the consistent players here, the Qataris, the Egyptians, the CIA. The second framework is the Shin Bet. That's the internal security services in Israel. They're trying to get let's say a 2-week ceasefire in exchange for 5 hostages released. that may be more feasible given the fact that, we can't identify the one person that knows where all the hostages are. So 5 is probably way more realistic than 101. There's the other sort of track that's happening at the same time, which is that the former CEO of SodaStream, this company that's based in Israel, he is actually calling for the release of any hostage. Anyone that brings a hostage forth and gets them out of Gaza will get a $100,000 bounty and amnesty. And that's interesting too, because I think, that's a way of appealing to the people of Gaza, who I think obviously are tired of this war. They are, I'm sure, eager to just get past this and start to work towards reconstruction, and maybe wouldn't mind getting out of Gaza too. And so it'll be interesting to see how that works. I would just argue one more track should be considered, or perhaps two more. One track would be a perhaps $1 million bounty for Mohammed Sinwar. This is the brother of Yahya Sinwar, the fallen leader of Hamas, the one who was killed just a few days ago. The brother is now running the war in Gaza. And I think a bounty for him, if somebody were to come forth and provide information on where he is, that would probably really be the last blow to Hamas in terms of having, just wiping out that top leadership in Gaza. I think it would be total chaos from there at a military level. But there is one more play that I think we have here in the United States, and this should be something embraced by the White House and perhaps embraced by some of our Western allies. A lot of the Hamas leaders are based in Qatar. In Qatar right now, we have a major air base. We have a what we call a major non-NATO alliance with the Qataris. We should be forcing the Qataris to put the remaining political leaders of Hamas under house arrest. Khalid Meshal in particular, he's probably the top figure associated with the Hamas leadership. He's a former Politburo chief of Hamas. If he were to be put under house arrest, and if he were to be put in front of an Al Jazeera camera, and if he were to declare the fighting over, if he were to declare a surrender on the part of Hamas, and if he were to call for the release of all of the hostages, that would be a major moment, a major turning point in the war. So I think bottom line is we're looking at a lot of different options here for trying to get to a ceasefire. It's not like there's only one. It's really just a question of political will, maybe a little bit of cash, certainly a bit of psychological operations. All of those things, I think, should be in play right now for an administration that, from all indications, is very eager to end the war before Biden's presidency is over.
All right, Dr. Jonathan Schanzer, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Anything else you want to add about a lot of different topics here before I let you go?
I would just add this, that the war with Hezbollah is probably the most underreported war right now as we look at an election cycle and Sinwar's death and an impending strike on Iran. Look, what's happening between Israel and Lebanon is steady escalation. It's obviously the Israelis are not at war with the people of Lebanon or the government of Lebanon. This is Hezbollah. This is Iran's most powerful proxy. They have a lot of deadly weapons that they have yet to use on the battlefield. The Israelis are doing everything they can to minimize the damage that Hezbollah could bring in what has already been a very damaging war. No one is even talking about the amount of damage that the Israelis have sustained in the northern part of their country, but it is unsustainable for them. And I would just say that when this election cycle here is over, I suspect we're going to see a lot more information come out about what's going on with that northern front for Israel, especially as the Gaza front starts to kind of wind down. And perhaps, we'll see what happens, whether there's escalation between Israel and Iran. But I suspect that this is going to be the big one for a while. And I think we need to hope for a perhaps a rapid victory from the Israelis, because without that, this thing could drag on well into 2025.
All right, Dr. Schanzer, as always, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.